Welcome to the depths below. End of silence. The final chapter in a chilling horror saga. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself. This story contains intense horror themes and is not suitable for children. The city was not the same. Even in the bright light of day, Michael could feel it. The wrongness in the air, the faint vibrations beneath the streets, the way shadows stretched a little too long at dusk. People moved faster now, heads down, avoiding eye contact. The watchers were no longer hiding. They stood openly on street corners and alleyways atop buildings, silent and unmoving. Michael kept the camera slung over his shoulder wherever he went, though he rarely filmed anymore. What was there left to capture? The infection had spread so quietly that no one seemed to notice, or maybe they chose not to. Chloe and Sam still met with him when they could, passing coded messages, gathering supplies. They had a plan, a final plan, one last desperate attempt to end it before the city, and perhaps the world, was swallowed whole. Michael knew the odds were against them, but this time they would not run. This time they would fight. They met in the shell of an old parking garage, the concrete cracked and crumbling, vines twisting up through the walls. Chloe arrived first, her face drawn and grim. Sam followed minutes later, carrying a heavy duffel bag filled with equipment scavenged from abandoned military depots and black market tech vendors. They set up quickly, working in silence. Michael unrolled a battered map of the underground system. Old, forgotten lines that hadn't been used in decades. At the center of the web was their target, the original breach point, deep beneath Station 103. Chloe traced the route with a gloved finger. We get in, plant the charges, collapse the tunnels, cut it off from the surface. Sam nodded. If we're lucky, we bury it forever. Michael said nothing. He knew luck had little to do with it. They had disturbed something ancient, something patient, and it would not die easily. But if they failed, there would be no one left to try again. Night fell as they moved through the empty streets, sticking to the shadows. The watchers observed them, but did not interfere. Yet. Michael felt their hollow gazes like needles against his skin. As they approached the old subway entrance, boarded up and forgotten, Chloe paused. "Once we go in," she said quietly, "there's no coming back." Sam offered a grim smile. Wasn't planning on it anyway. Michael checked the camera one last time, the red light blinking steadily. If this was their end, he wanted it recorded, not for fame, not for proof, but because stories mattered, even if no one ever heard it. He pushed open the rusted gate and they slipped into the darkness. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. Every footstep echoed like a gunshot in the empty station. Somewhere far below, Michael swore he could hear it. The slow, steady heartbeat of the thing they had come to destroy. They moved deeper into the tunnels, the air growing colder and heavier with every step. Their flashlights carved narrow beams through the darkness, revealing graffiti-covered walls and shattered remnants of the old station. The ground beneath them vibrated softly, a slow pulse that seemed almost alive. Chloe consulted the map, her brow furrowed. "This way," she whispered, leading them toward a maintenance tunnel that sloped sharply downward. As they descended, the walls changed. The graffiti gave way to strange symbols, spirals, eyes, jagged marks that seemed to shimmer when the light hit them just right. Michael felt the old fear rising, but he forced it down. There was no room for fear now. They had come too far. Behind them, faint footsteps echoed, soft, deliberate. Michael turned, flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing, but he knew better. They were being followed. The maintenance tunnel narrowed until they had to walk single file. Pipes lined the walls, leaking rust-stained water that pooled around their boots. The air smelled of mold and something far worse, a metallic, rotting stench that burned their nostrils. Chloe led the way, moving quickly but carefully, every so often glancing over her shoulder. Sam brought up the rear, his hand never far from the weapons slung across his chest. Michael kept the camera rolling, though the static was worsening. Every few minutes the screen flickered, showing brief glimpses of things that weren't there. twisted faces, hollow eyes, impossible corridors stretching into infinity. The watchers were close now, closer than they had ever been. They didn't need to hide anymore. Michael's hand tightened around the camera. They couldn't afford to slow down. The heart of the darkness was near. He could feel it. They reached a small junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Chloe hesitated, scanning the map with shaking hands. "Middle tunnel," she said finally. "Straight down." Without a word, they plunged into the center tunnel, the darkness swallowing them whole. Here, the walls pulsed faintly, breathing in slow, sick rhythms. The heartbeat beneath their feet grew louder, more insistent. Michael swept the flashlight ahead and froze. In the beam of light stood a door, massive, ancient, covered in layers of locks and chains. Symbols had been carved deep into the metal, some glowing faintly, others blackened and burned. Chloe stepped up beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "This is it." Sam dropped the duffel bag heavily on the ground, pulling out the explosives. Michael kept filming, the camera shaking in his hands. They had found the source. Now they just had to destroy it, before it destroyed them. Sam set to work quickly, attaching the explosives to the heavy door with practiced movements. Chloe kept watch, her flashlight darting nervously across the tunnel behind them. Michael filmed everything, though part of him wanted to drop the camera and run. The air was wrong here, thick, oily, heavy enough that every breath felt like inhaling smoke. As Sam finished setting the last charge, a deep vibration rumbled through the ground, stronger than anything they had felt before. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and somewhere far below, the heartbeat quickened. "Ready," Sam said, stepping back and handing Chloe the detonator. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the button. Michael could see the doubt in her eyes. What if destroying this door unleashed something even worse? Chloe swallowed hard, then pressed the button. The explosion was muffled but powerful, shaking the tunnel and sending a shockwave of dust and debris cascading around them. When the smoke cleared, the door hung shattered on twisted hinges, exposing a yawning black corridor beyond. A wave of freezing air rolled out, carrying with it the foul stench of decay and something older, something wrong. Michael gagged, pulling his scarf over his mouth and nose. Chloe raised her flashlight, the beam trembling as it pierced the darkness. The tunnel ahead seemed endless, stretching beyond the reach of their lights. At the far edge, just barely visible, something moved. Slow, deliberate, massive. Michael lifted the camera. If they ran now, they would survive. Maybe, but if they didn't finish what they started, no one else would ever have the chance. He stepped forward, heart hammering. Chloe and Sam followed, and together they entered the darkness. The tunnel felt alive. Every step forward was a battle against the thick, cloying air that pulled at their limbs like invisible hands. Their flashlights barely pierced the gloom, illuminating only fragments of the horror that surrounded them. Broken chains embedded in the walls, long-forgotten tools rusted into the floor, faint echoes of ancient, tormented screams. Michael kept the camera close, the red light blinking steadily. Even as static crackled across the feed. The watchers followed at a distance now, silent shadows slipping between the ruined machinery and broken pillars. Chloe stumbled and Sam caught her, steadying her with a grim nod. "Almost there," he said, though none of them truly believed it. The heartbeat was a deafening roar now, shaking the tunnel with each pulse. Michael felt it deep in his bones, an ancient summons pulling them toward the final confrontation. They had come too far to turn back. Whatever waited ahead, they would face it. Together. They pressed deeper into the tunnel, the ground vibrating harder beneath their feet. The walls grew stranger, less like stone and more like hardened flesh, covered in pulsating veins that glowed faintly with a sickly green light. Every breath tasted of metal and ash. Michael caught glimpses of movement at the edge of his vision, long, thin limbs pulling themselves along the walls, eyeless faces twisted in silent agony. He tightened his grip on the camera, forcing himself to keep moving. Chloe pointed ahead, where the tunnel widened into a cavernous chamber. A massive structure loomed at the center, a throne of bone and rusted metal stitched together from the ruins of countless lost things, and seated upon it was the source of the infection, a being of shadow and teeth, its form shifting and unstable, as if reality itself struggled to contain it. Michael felt the overwhelming urge to flee, to abandon everything and run, but he stood firm. They had come to end this, and they would. The creature on the throne stirred as they entered, its countless eyes opening slowly, fixing on them with a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through flesh and bone. Chloe raised the detonator, her hands shaking. Sam pulled a crude makeshift weapon from his pack, a device designed to disrupt the entity's connection to the physical world, though none of them knew if it would work. Michael filmed, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Now!" Chloe whispered. Sam hurled the device toward the throne. It struck the ground with a burst of blinding light, and the creature shrieked, a sound that tore through the chamber like a hurricane, shattering bones and stone alike. The walls buckled inward, and the watchers howled from the edges of the room, writhing in agony. Michael stumbled back, the camera slipping from his hands, landing with a crack on the ground. The throne splintered, the creature's form unraveling into smoke and screaming shadows. For a brief, impossible moment, it seemed they might win. But victory came at a cost. The throne exploded outward, sending shards of bone and metal hurtling through the air. Chloe cried out as a piece struck her side, knocking her to the ground. Sam rushed to her, pulling her behind a shattered pillar. Michael scrambled for the camera, grabbing it just as the chamber began to collapse. The creature reformed in the chaos, smaller now but faster, angrier, a writhing mass of hunger and hatred. Sam fired the last charge from his weapon, the blast staggering the thing but not destroying it. "Run!" Chloe gasped, blood staining her shirt. They didn't hesitate. They fled back toward the tunnel, the ground cracking and splitting beneath them. Behind them, the creature roared, a sound of pure rage. Michael filmed as he ran, capturing the final collapse of the throne, the crumbling walls, and the darkness surging after them. They had wounded it, but the battle was far from over. They tore through the collapsing tunnels, every step a fight against falling debris and surging darkness. Chloe stumbled, clutching her injured side, but Michael and Sam kept her moving, half carrying her when she faltered. The watchers no longer stood silent. They moved now, twisted forms scrambling along the walls and ceilings, clawing at the air as if trying to drag the fleeing humans back into the abyss. Michael's flashlight flickered and died, leaving only the weak glow from Sam's device and the crackling static of the damaged camera. "This way!" Sam shouted, leading them toward a side passage that sloped sharply upward. Michael followed blindly, trusting Sam's instincts over his own growing panic. The heartbeat beneath the city was faltering now, its rhythm broken and staggering. They had hurt the creature, maybe even crippled it, but the city was still collapsing, and time was running out. The side passage narrowed into a crumbling service shaft lined with broken ladders and rusted pipes. Chloe gasped in pain with every movement, but she didn't stop. Michael filmed in short, shaky bursts, catching glimpses of the destruction behind them, tunnels collapsing, watchers writhing in fury, the creature's shrieks splitting the air. As they climbed, the walls around them groaned and shifted. Dust and stones rained down, forcing them to move faster. At the top of the shaft, a heavy grate blocked their way. Sam slammed his shoulder against it once, twice, until it finally gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Daylight spilled in, blinding after so much darkness. They scrambled through the opening, collapsing onto broken asphalt. Above them, the city skyline wavered, buildings swaying unnaturally. Sirens blared in the distance, and the air stank of burning concrete and electricity. They had escaped, but only barely. Michael pushed himself up, blinking against the harsh light. Chloe lay gasping beside him, blood staining the ground. Sam knelt next to her, tearing strips of cloth to bind her wound. Around them, the city was in chaos. Streets had cracked open, cars lay abandoned, smoke curled from shattered windows. People ran in every direction, some screaming, some eerily silent. And above it all, the watchers stood on rooftops and traffic lights, observing with cold, empty eyes. Michael grabbed the camera and panned across the devastation. This was no longer about a single breach underground. The infection had reached the surface. It was everywhere now. He turned back to Chloe and Sam. "We have to finish it," he said, voice raw. Sam nodded grimly. "One last shot," he said. Chloe smiled weakly. "Let's make it count." Michael looked down at the cracked pavement beneath his feet. The battle wasn't over yet, but this time they knew what they were fighting for. They moved quickly through the ruined streets, avoiding the watchers whenever possible. The ground still trembled beneath their feet, and deep, resonant booms echoed from the heart of the city, the creature's dying rage made manifest. Chloe leaned on Sam, her face pale but determined. Michael led the way, scanning the crumbling skyline for any sign of the access point they needed, the old emergency shaft that would lead them back down to the creature's core. The map Chloe had found showed it was hidden in an abandoned subway station nearby. They had no other choice. As they crossed a broken intersection, a watcher turned its head toward them, its hollow gaze locking onto Michael. He froze, heart hammering. Then, slowly, the creature turned away, watching, waiting. Michael breathed again and pressed forward. They didn't have much time. The infection was still spreading, and if they didn't destroy the heart of it now, there would be no city left to save. The entrance to the old subway station was half buried under rubble, hidden behind a collapsed building. Sam and Michael cleared the debris as quickly as they could, working with raw, bleeding hands. Chloe kept watch, the makeshift weapon resting across her knees. Finally, they pried open the rusted metal doors and slipped inside, the smell of damp earth and rot enveloping them instantly. Inside, the darkness was absolute, swallowing the weak beams of their flashlight. They moved cautiously, every sound amplified by the suffocating silence. The station was a ghost of itself. Shattered tiles, broken benches, shattered tracks. And deep below, they could feel it pulsing. Weaker now, but still alive. Michael filmed steadily, documenting every step. If they didn't make it back, he wanted someone, anyone, to know what had happened. Chloe gritted her teeth against the pain, pushing forward without complaint. Sam kept close to her, weapon ready. The final descent had begun. They found the emergency shaft near the far end of the station. A narrow, rusted tunnel leading straight down into the darkness. Sam tied off a rope and lowered Chloe first, then Michael followed, gripping the rope tight as he dropped into the void. The air grew colder the deeper they went, until their breath misted in front of them. Michael's ears popped from the pressure, and a low resonating hum filled the shaft. When they reached the bottom, they stood in a cavern unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were covered in black, throbbing veins, and the ground was slick with something thick and dark. At the center, a massive beating mass of twisted flesh and metal pulsed slowly, each beat sending a tremor through the earth. Chloe staggered forward, raising the last of their makeshift charges. Michael steadied her, his hands firm. Sam set the timers carefully, glancing around the cavern with haunted eyes. "This is it," he said. "No more running." The cavern vibrated with a deep, unnatural pulse as Sam armed the explosives. Michael kept the camera trained on the heart of the infection, capturing its grotesque, endless beating. Chloe leaned heavily against a shattered pillar, her face pale but her eyes fierce. "We have to make sure it's destroyed," she said through gritted teeth. Sam nodded grimly. "We plant the charges and get as far away as we can." Michael glanced around the cavern. Watchers clung to the walls high above, their hollow faces watching in silence, unmoving for now. The heart's pulse slowed slightly, as if sensing the threat. Michael adjusted the focus on the camera, recording every second. They would either end it here, or the city, maybe the world, would fall. Chloe straightened painfully, pushing herself toward the center of the room. "Let's finish this," she whispered. Sam placed the final charge at the base of the pulsing heart, the timer flashing steadily. They had less than 5 minutes once it was armed. Michael kept an eye on the watchers above, but none moved. Yet. Chloe stumbled as she set a secondary device near a web of veins connected to the structure, severing its influence. As she activated the device, a tremor shook the cavern, and the watchers let out a low, collective hiss that made Michael's blood run cold. "Time to go," Sam shouted. They turned and sprinted back toward the shaft, the heartbeat behind them quickening into a panicked rhythm. The walls shuddered, pieces breaking free and crashing to the ground. Michael filmed as long as he could, catching glimpses of the watchers descending from the walls like spiders, long limbs stretching hungrily toward them. He shoved the camera back into his pack and scrambled up the rope after Chloe and Sam. Behind them, the darkness screamed. They burst back into the ruined subway station, gasping for breath. Chloe collapsed onto the cracked tiles, clutching her side. Sam helped her up roughly, throwing an arm around her shoulders. "Move!" he barked, dragging her toward the exit. Michael stayed a moment longer, filming the shaft as a low rumble rose from deep below. The ground buckled and a shock wave of dust and heat roared upward. Michael turned and ran, heart pounding. They stumbled out into the burning daylight, the city a broken, twisted landscape of ruin and smoke. Behind them, the ground collapsed inward, the station and everything beneath it swallowed by a chasm of darkness. They threw themselves behind a shattered wall as the explosives detonated with a deafening roar, the shock wave flattening everything in its path. For a moment, the world went silent. Michael lifted his head slowly, ears ringing. The watchers were gone. The heartbeat had stopped, and for the first time in months, the air was still. Dust settled slowly over the ruins. Michael sat up fully, coughing and wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. Chloe and Sam were both alive, bruised and battered but breathing. The world around them was eerily quiet, the only sounds the distant wail of sirens and the crackle of small fires. Michael pulled the camera from his pack and turned it on. The screen flickered, but it worked. He filmed the aftermath, the broken streets, the sun bleeding through the smoky sky, the silence where the watchers had once stood. Chloe leaned against Sam, exhausted but smiling weakly. "We did it," she said, her voice rough but certain. Michael nodded slowly, disbelief still sinking in. For the first time, it felt real. The infection, the watchers, the heart, it was over, and they had survived, barely. They wandered through the ruined streets, heading toward what remained of their homes. People were emerging now, dazed, battered, but alive. Some stared at Michael and his friends as they passed, silent questions in their eyes. Michael didn't have answers for them, not yet. They passed crumbled buildings, shattered cars, and streets torn open by the collapse. Everywhere they went, there was evidence of the battle they had fought, but also signs of survival. Life stubbornly pushing back against the darkness. Michael filmed it all, documenting the fragile new beginning. Chloe leaned heavily on Sam, but she smiled more easily now. "Maybe it's over," she said softly. Michael wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that the watchers were truly gone, that the infection had been destroyed. But deep down, he knew the scars would remain, hidden, quiet, but waiting. The important thing was that they had fought, and they had won. As they reached a familiar street, Michael paused, staring up at the skyline. The buildings stood tall but wounded, like survivors of a long siege. He filmed one last shot, a slow pan across the city they had saved, capturing the broken beauty of it. Chloe and Sam stood beside him, silent but strong. Michael lowered the camera and turned to them. "We should tell the story," he said. Chloe smiled tiredly. "People deserve to know." Sam nodded. "And to remember." Together they walked away from the ruins, into the uncertain light of a new day. The battle for the city was over. The depths had been sealed. The watchers had been driven back into the shadows. For now at least, the surface belonged to the living again. Michael slung the camera over his shoulder, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a promise. Some stories had to be told, and this one was finally ready to end. Days passed. The city struggled to heal. Emergency crews worked around the clock, clearing debris and restoring power. Survivors gathered in makeshift shelters, sharing stories of the day the ground shook and the shadows vanished. Few knew what had truly happened beneath their feet. Michael, Chloe, and Sam stayed together, moving between shelters, helping where they could. Michael filmed everything, The resilience, the hope, the stubborn refusal to give in to fear. At night he replayed the footage, piecing together the story they would eventually share with the world. Chloe's wounds healed slowly, and Sam's haunted look began to fade. For the first time in months they talked about the future, about rebuilding, about living. But Michael couldn't forget the darkness they had faced. He knew that even in victory, there were scars that would never fully heal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ruined skyline, Michael sat on a rooftop, camera balanced on his knee. Chloe joined him, handing him a battered notebook filled with sketches and notes from their journey. "For when you're ready to tell it," she said. Michael nodded, touched by the gesture. "It's not just our story," he said quietly. "It belongs to everyone who fought, everyone who survived." Chloe smiled and sat beside him, staring out at the city slowly stitching itself back together. "We're still here," she said. "That's what matters." Michael turned the camera toward the horizon, capturing the moment. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were still ruins, still fear, still questions. But there was also hope, and sometimes hope was enough. A week later, they held a small memorial in the shell of the old library, the place where it had all begun. Survivors gathered, lighting candles among the ruins. No speeches, no grand ceremony, just silence, respect, and remembrance. Michael filmed quietly from the edges, documenting the faces of those who had endured. Chloe stood beside a cracked pillar, her hand resting on the old broken wall. Sam helped an old man place a candle on a shattered step. The watchers were gone, but their memory lingered, stitched into the city's bones. Michael lowered the camera and joined Chloe. "Think they'll ever know?" he asked. Chloe smiled softly. "Maybe, maybe not. But we'll remember. That's enough." Together they bowed their heads as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, a sky free for now of watchers. The candles flickered in the soft night breeze, casting long, wavering shadows across the broken stone. Michael sat with Chloe and Sam, sharing quiet memories of the friends they had lost, the places now buried beneath the earth. It wasn't sadness that filled the air, but something more complicated. A bittersweet acceptance. They had seen the depths of darkness and survived. That mattered. Michael turned the camera off and set it aside. Some moments weren't meant to be recorded, some were meant to be lived. As the last of the candles burned low, the small group slowly dispersed, leaving only the three of them beneath the stars. Chloe leaned her head against Michael's shoulder. Sam sat cross-legged nearby, humming a soft, tuneless melody. The war was over. The silence was theirs now. Weeks later, life in the city found a strange kind of rhythm. Some buildings were repaired, others left to stand as solemn reminders of what had been fought and lost. Michael found himself filming less and living more. Chloe began volunteering at a shelter, helping others rebuild their homes. Sam started training as a firefighter, determined to protect the city in a new way. Michael spent his days editing their footage into a coherent story, a testament to what had happened beneath the streets, what had been sacrificed to save the surface. Sometimes he hesitated, wondering if anyone would believe it, but in the end, it didn't matter. The truth had weight, even if unseen. One afternoon, they gathered on a small hill overlooking the city, the skyline scarred but standing. Michael lifted the camera one last time and captured the moment. Chloe laughing, Sam tossing pebbles into the wind. The world slowly healing itself. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, Michael lowered the camera and turned to his friends. "It's time," he said. Chloe smiled and Sam nodded in agreement. Together, they buried the camera in a small sealed box beneath the hill, a time capsule for the future. Not to hide what had happened, but to preserve it, to remind whoever found it that even in the darkest places there had been hope, courage, and light. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind whispering through the grass. Then, without a word, they turned and walked back toward the city, toward life, toward tomorrow, and as they disappeared into the gathering dusk, the last echoes of the depths below faded into silence, finally and forever. Months passed. The city healed slowly, scars hidden beneath new construction and the steady hum of returning life. New parks grew where ruins once stood. Children played in streets once cracked open by unseen horrors. Michael, Chloe, and Sam stayed close, bound by memories only they truly understood. Michael's nights were sometimes restless, haunted by dreams of watchers standing at the edge of vision. But each morning, the sun rose and life went on. Chloe opened a small community center, teaching others to rebuild. Sam wore his firefighter's uniform with pride. Michael wrote, capturing every lesson they had learned, every small victory. Not for fame or recognition, but because the story mattered. Darkness had touched their world, but it had not consumed it. One evening, Michael visited the hill where they had buried the time capsule. He sat quietly, watching the city lights flicker to life as the sun dipped behind the skyline. In his hands was a small notebook, the final piece of their story. He wrote slowly, carefully, recording the truth they had fought so hard to preserve. When he finished, he tucked the notebook into a second sealed box and buried it beside the first. Someday someone would find them. Someday someone would remember. He sat for a while longer, feeling the breeze tug at his hair, hearing the distant sounds of laughter and music. The watchers were truly gone. The heartbeat beneath the city had fallen silent. For the first time in a long time, Michael allowed himself to believe it was over. Truly over. Winter came, blanketing the city in soft white snow. The streets sparkled under the streetlights, clean and quiet. Michael walked alone through the familiar paths, camera left at home. He didn't need it anymore. Everything that mattered was already captured, already remembered. He passed rebuilt buildings, new cafes, bright murals painted over old scars. People smiled more now, lived louder. The city had not forgotten its wounds, but it had chosen to heal. As he crossed the old subway entrance, now sealed and turned into a memorial garden, Michael paused. A small plaque read, "In memory of those who fought the darkness and those who will always keep watch." He touched the cold metal gently, a small smile on his lips. The battle had ended, the city had won, and the depths below would remain silent forever. Michael left the memorial garden with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Snow crunched under his boots as he wandered through the quiet streets. He passed Chloe's community center, its windows glowing warmly, laughter spilling into the night. He passed the fire station where Sam worked, the red engines gleaming under fresh snow. Life had not only returned, it had flourished. Michael paused on a bridge overlooking the frozen river, watching the city breathe and move around him. The fear, the nightmares, the endless vigilance, they no longer ruled him. He still remembered, of course, he always would. But remembrance was no longer a weight he carried. It was a part of him, woven into the fabric of who he had become. He turned his face to the falling snow, letting it kiss his skin. They had endured the darkness, they had survived, and they had won. Spring came early that year. Buds pushed through the thawing ground, and the city blossomed in colors Michael hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime. Chloe organized a festival in the old quarter, music, food, dancing, a celebration of survival. Michael helped set up lanterns, bright paper lights that bobbed in the soft evening breeze. Sam manned the fire pits, laughing louder than Michael had heard in months. As the sun set, the lanterns were released into the sky, a river of light rising over the rooftops. Michael stood with Chloe and Sam, watching the lights drift higher and higher. "We're free," Chloe whispered. Michael nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside him. No watchers waited in the dark. No unseen pulse vibrated beneath their feet. Just the city, alive and healing, moving forward. Michael lifted a lantern of his own, releasing it with a silent wish. A wish for the future. A future they had earned. Later that night, Michael sat alone on the same rooftop where he had once filmed the watchers, camera long since packed away. He stared up at the stars, brighter now without the smog and fear that had once choked the sky. He thought of the friends they had lost, the battles they had fought, the darkness they had conquered. He thought of Chloe and Sam, stronger than anyone he had ever known. And he thought of the city, scarred but standing, a testament to resilience. Michael smiled softly and closed his eyes, letting the peace wash over him. No nightmares came, no shadows lingered. Only quiet, only stars, only life. The depths below were silent now, not waiting, not plotting, just silent. And above them, the city lived on, stronger and brighter than ever before. Summer warmed the city, and life surged forward in a way Michael hadn't dared hope for before. New shops opened, children played in the parks, artists painted the walls that had once been scarred by the Watchers' shadows. Michael spent his days helping Chloe at the community center, teaching photography classes to kids who had never known the city's darker days. Sam often visited, telling stories that made them all laugh until their sides ached. It wasn't a perfect world. There were still struggles, still hard days, but the city had chosen life. Michael found himself smiling more, laughing easier. He often wandered the streets with his old battered camera, not to capture horrors, but to capture hope. Hope written on every wall, in every handshake, in every sunrise. Hope that they had fought for. Hope they had earned. One evening, as Michael packed up after a long day at the center, Chloe handed him an envelope. "It's time," she said with a small smile. Inside was an invitation, an exhibition at the City Museum dedicated to documenting the past, the survival, and the rebirth of their home. Michael's photographs would be the centerpiece. He hesitated at first, unsure if he was ready to share so much of their story, but when he looked at Chloe and saw the pride in her eyes, he nodded. "Let's do it," he said. The exhibition would not be about the Watchers or the fear. It would be about endurance, about light reclaiming darkness, about the people who refused to give in. Michael realized then that telling their story wasn't just important, it was necessary, because remembering was the truest form of victory. The night of the exhibition arrived. Michael stood in the center of the museum, surrounded by photographs, images of the city broken and healing, of faces lined with sorrow and hope, of streets once dark now filled with life. People moved slowly through the halls, silent and respectful. Chloe and Sam stood beside him, smiling proudly. Michael's heart felt full in a way it never had before. He stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room, nerves fluttering in his... He looked out over the crowd, survivors, builders, dreamers, and spoke simply. "This is our story," he said, "not just of what we survived, but of what we chose to become after." He paused, letting the silence settle around him. The darkness came, and we endured. We rebuilt. We lived. The crowd burst into quiet, heartfelt applause. Michael smiled and stepped back, the weight of the past finally lifting from his shoulders. As the evening wore on, Michael stood quietly at the edge of the room, watching the people, laughing, sharing stories, pointing at the photos with wonder instead of fear. Chloe joined him, slipping her hand into his. "We did it," she whispered. Sam approached, grinning. "You're a hero now, Mike," he joked, nudging him. Michael laughed softly, shaking his head. "No heroes," he said, "just survivors." Outside, the city lights sparkled against the night sky, clean and pure. The Watchers were gone, the depths below were silent, and for the first time, truly and finally, they were free. Michael glanced once more at the exhibition, at the captured memories lining the walls, and knew they had done more than survive. They had reclaimed their world. Together they stepped out into the warm night air, leaving behind the past, ready to live fully in the future. And beneath the earth, the silence remained unbroken. Forever. Thank you for listening to The Depths Below, End of Silence. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying journeys into the unknown.